Welcome to Profit Guardian, and I'll tell you the difference between developed and developing countries. Between developed and developing countries, one can identify a variety of differences. This differentiation of countries as developed and developing is used to classify countries according to the economic status based on per capita income, industrialization, literacy rate, living standards, etc. IMF and World Bank have statistical measures for the convenience of classification, though there are no definitions for this classification, and many developing and under or undeveloped countries are critical of this terminology. So this video, let us examine the differences between developed and developing countries. Now, what are developed countries? First of all, developed countries have industrial growth and enjoy flourishing economy. Developed countries experience marked development and growth in the areas such as transportation, business and education. Developed countries are characterized by a low death rate and low birth rate as well. There is usually a very small gap between the two rates in developed countries. Developed countries are not characterized by shortcoming. They are well developed in all fronts and are served well by water supplies, amenities, educational institutions, health care concerns. This is because of the fact that people are endowed with awareness about every possible aspect relating to human existence. The absence of shortcoming in the developed country is possibly due to the fact there is a low birth rate in these countries. Nutrition is available in plenty to mothers and infants in developed countries. Now, what are developing countries? Developing countries depend on the developed countries for help to establish the industries. They have only begun to taste the growth of the economy. Developing countries are in the beginning stages of development in the areas of education, business and transportation. Developing countries are characterized by many shortcomings. These shortcomings include less awareness regarding matters relating to health, poor amenities, shortage in water supply, shortcoming in the area of medical supply, a higher rate of birth rate. The most important worrying factor in the developing country is the factor of poor nutrition. Poor nutrition to both mothers and infants is the main concern in the developing countries. Due to high birth rate, the probability of natural diseases is more in developing countries. Hence, the death rates are also eventually high in the developing countries. Since natural diseases increase by high rates in the developing countries, they will have a short population doubling time. In the case of developing countries, there is usually a big gap between the birth rate and the death rate. Infant mortality factor is influenced by the development factor of the countries. A developing country, for that matter, would have higher infant mortality than a developed country. Now, what's the difference between developed and developing countries? First of all, the definition. Developed countries display a high level of development, while developing countries display a lower development in such areas such as industrialization, human capital, etc. Now, what are the characteristics of developed and developing countries? Developed countries have industrial growth. Developing countries depend on the developed countries for the help to establish the industries. Now, economy. Developed countries enjoy a flourishing economy. Developing countries begin to taste the growth of the economy. Now, what are the areas of development? Developed countries experience marked development and growth in the areas such as transportation, business and education, whereas developing countries are in the beginning stages of development in the areas of education, business and transportation. Gap between birth and death rate. Developed countries are characterized by a low death rate and low birth rate as well. There is usually a very small gap between the two rates in the developed countries. And in developing countries, there is usually a big gap between the birth rate and the death rate. So thank you. Please subscribe to my channel Perfect Guardian and give your comments.